Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the first webinar for the Jaipal State and Local Innovation Initiative and for taking the time to be with us here today. So my name is Julia Shabry, and I'm a policy manager with Jaipal North America. I'm joined here today by Jonathan Guryan, who's one of our initiative co-chairs, as well as an associate professor of economics, human development, and social policy at Northwestern University, as well as Evelyn Diaz, who's the president of the Heartland Alliance, a leading anti-poverty organization in the Midwest. Evelyn's also the former commissioner for the City of Chicago's Department of Family and Support Services. I know we have representatives from a number of state and local governments as well as other stakeholders on the line. We're very excited to tell you more about the state and local initiative, answer any questions you may have, and begin a conversation about how Jaipal can help support more state and local governments in using randomized evaluations to inform their decision-making. Here's a quick look at the agenda for today's webinar. As you can see, there's a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be taking all the questions today through the chat box, so feel free to submit them at any time, and we'll do our best to respond to as many questions as possible once the presentation ends. So Jaipal was founded in 2003 as a research center based in the economics department of MIT. Excuse me. There we go. Sorry about that. So Jaipal was founded in 2003 as a research center based in the economics department at MIT. Jaipal stands for the Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, and our mission is to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. And Jaipal's specific expertise is in using randomized evaluations to answer policy questions. Each dot on the map here represents a randomized evaluation led by one or more of Jaipal's affiliated researchers. And to date, Jaipal's network of affiliated researchers have conducted more than 680 ongoing and completed evaluations across more than 60 countries. And over 200 million lives have been touched by the scale-up of proven programs. While the state and local innovation initiative that we're describing here today is new, a number of Jaipal's affiliated researchers have many years of experience partnering with state and local governments across the U.S. And Jon and Evelyn will give some examples of that work today. You can think about Jaipal as two groups of people. And the first is more than 130 affiliated researchers who sit at universities across the world. These professors are mostly economists, but they work across sectors, studying issues ranging from education to healthcare to crime prevention. And the second group of people is Jaipal's professional staff, who are based at Jaipal's global headquarters and across 6 regional offices, including Jaipal North America, where I sit. And Jaipal staff work to improve the effectiveness of social programs in their regions through 3 core activities. The first is by supporting the evaluations conducted by our affiliated researchers. The second is policy outreach, which typically takes place both on the front end to connect researchers and policymakers to design and launch new evaluations, or on the back end to share the lessons from completed evaluations with policymakers and other decision makers. And finally, we do capacity building to help equip policymakers to be better consumers of evidence and to partner with researchers to carry out evaluations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jon, who's going to tell you more about the Jaipal State and Local Innovation Initiative and some of the resources that are available to state and local governments.
Okay, thanks, Julia. So I want to start off by just saying a little bit about the challenge that we view that many of the participants on the call today face every day. That also motivates why we think this initiative might be helpful and lead to better outcomes for people, but also for better policymaking and learning from that governments can do. So the challenge that we view that the many state and local policymakers face is that there is not a lack of innovation. State and local policymakers, as you know, are often innovating. A lot of the innovation in government happens at the state and local level. and state and local policymakers are often innovating to try and solve important and complex big policy problems. But one thing I hear a lot from policymakers is that decisions have to be made, and decisions have to be made about policies to either implement or to not implement or to change, with whatever evidence and information is at hand at the time, and often you can't wait. So what that means is that policymakers often have to act and make decisions and choices without the benefit of rigorous evidence about what other state and local governments have tried and what's worked and what hasn't to try and solve a similar program, but also about what other state and local policymakers have tried in the past in their particular area or their government. And so what we view is that there's lots of innovation that's happening, and there is an opportunity. And that opportunity is that innovation could lead to knowledge, both for the state and local government who's doing the innovation, but also knowledge for other state and local policymakers who are going to be making similar choices in the future. So the way I do a lot of research on education, and in the education world, I'm sure this is true in lots of other settings, but in the education world, what you see commonly is that practitioners will and experts will make claims about a new policy, a new way of educating students or implementing schooling that and make very compelling arguments for why it's the right way to go. It will become popular and lots of schools will try it. Then 5 years later, someone else will come up and have a very compelling argument about why something that's maybe the complete opposite is a better way to go. And lots of schools will change and go to the other thing. And then 5 years later, someone will make a very compelling argument about why the thing everyone was trying 10 years ago was a better thing to do. And at each point, those decisions are made without really knowing whether the things that everyone had tried a few times, whether they had worked or not. So we have a hypothesis, which is that all this innovation is happening, and there's an opportunity for performing rigorous evaluations about what's working and what's not, but that the reason why those evaluations don't happen is that the innovators, many of the people on this call, face the challenge of aligning multiple things all at once that are necessary to conduct those evaluations that could lead to knowledge that would be very helpful in the future. The first is identifying which of the innovations, the new programs that are being tried, the programs that are currently being tried but maybe being implemented in a different way, which of those are ripe for evaluation. So some things are easy to study and other things are not. The second is that many state and local governments don't have the capacity to perform evaluations like this, research like we're talking about themselves. Some of course do. Some have internal resources to, expertise to conduct evaluations. But given the limited resources that many state and local governments have, many aren't have the luxury of having internal capacity to perform evaluations. And it's hard to find the researchers that are out there who are really interested in the same types of questions that you face every day. But they're out there, and by coordinating with them, finding a research team that would be happy to work with you is difficult. And then the third thing is that finding funding to carry out evaluations is difficult as well in the resource-constrained world that we live in. So that's where we think the Jaipal State and Local Innovation Initiative can maybe come in. So the idea is that selected state and local governments would receive three things. One is technical support from Jaipal staff to help develop and identify evaluations that could happen, so to develop and identify the programs that could potentially be studied and that would fit well with a randomized evaluation of the sort that Jaipal has the expertise to help out with. The second is they would receive flexible funding to help get the evaluations going. And then the third would be that Jaipal would act as a sort of matchmaker to connect state and local governments with researchers from around the country in Jaipal's network who have both the expertise and the interest that overlap with what you, the state and local government policymakers, are interested in studying. So, you know, our end goal is to support policymakers in using randomized evaluations to do two things. One is to generate rigorous evidence that they and others can use to answer both their policy questions, but also to help other state and local policymakers answer similar questions, but also to help them share the findings so that other policymakers, other state and local governments can use that information to make decisions in the future with more evidence about what works and what doesn't, but also to build momentum to show that this partnership between researchers and policymakers to generate evidence that this can happen on a larger scale and not just one experiment at a time. So let me say a little bit about what a randomized evaluation is, because that's something we've talked about a little bit, but something that is you know, a key to what Jaipal does. So the idea behind a randomized evaluation is that there's a program that you want to study the effect of, or some intervention that you want to study the effect of, some policy or program, and you identify the set of people. We'll call that the population, the set of people who would be eligible to either participate in the program or to be affected by the program or intervention. And then you randomly split the population, the set of people, into two groups. You can think of it as flipping a coin, and everyone who gets heads would be eligible to receive the program, and everyone who got tails would not. That will split the population into two groups, what you might call the treatment group and the control group. The people who got the heads, or the treatment group, they would be offered the program, and the people who got tails would not. The reason why this is such a powerful design is that randomization makes it so that on average the two groups are the same, except for the fact that one group got offered the program and the other one didn't. And that allows you to look at to compare outcomes between the two groups and assign or relate the difference in the outcomes to the program itself. This is exactly the way that, for instance, we would test the efficacy of a new drug. The FDA would require that you did some sort of randomized evaluation to test the efficacy of a new cancer drug or a new cholesterol-reducing drug, and the outcomes that you see, or the results that you see, are fairly easily interpretable, and it is a way to make sure that you're not looking at outcomes of people who received the program and comparing them to outcomes for people who didn't receive the programs. Without randomization, it would be hard to know whether those differences in outcomes were actually the result of having participated in or receiving the program versus just differences in who happens to participate versus who doesn't. I'll describe an example of a randomized evaluation that I was involved in. So this is a study. I said earlier that I often study education or outcomes in schools. So this is a study of an intensive individualized math tutoring program called Match Tutoring that was that we studied in the Chicago public schools. I won't go into the details of the program too much in the interest of time, but the idea is that there's an intensive math tutoring program, and we want to know whether it causes kids to learn more, to learn math more quickly than they otherwise would have. So the idea is that we chose a set of schools to work in. We worked with the Chicago Public Schools to select 12 Chicago Public Schools high schools. We worked in schools that were on the south and west side of Chicago, which are the lower income areas of the city. And we selected a group of 9th and 10th grade boys who would be eligible to participate in the program. Now, we only had funding to serve about 600 kids, but there are way more than 600 kids in the Chicago Public Schools or in these high schools who we thought might benefit from the program. It's just a reality that we didn't have enough funding to serve everybody that could benefit. And so we it turns out that there were about 2,700 kids who met the criteria for being eligible for the program, and we randomly selected 600 of them to participate. And then, because we selected them randomly, the 600 that were selected randomly are similar to the remaining kids who were randomly selected not to participate, and we can compare the outcomes of the two groups. What we found was that at the end of a year of the program, the kids who were randomly selected to participate or to be offered the chance to participate, they had significantly higher math test scores on standardized tests, significantly higher math grades. They were less likely to fail classes by about 50%. They did better both in their math classes and in their other classes, surprisingly. And so the results were dramatically positive. The other interesting thing to notice or to note is that when we did the study, we raised money from private foundations to support the intervention itself. But the Chicago Public Schools, upon seeing the results and having watched it in practice, they made the choice to use their own very, very limited funding. If you know anything about Chicago, you're aware that Chicago Public Schools has very significant funding problems. They decided that the results were so positive that they would use their own funding, and they have continued to run the program themselves using money from their own budget as a result of this study. Okay, so when does a randomized evaluation not make sense? Randomized evaluations don't fit every situation. So a couple of situations that don't work. One is, if you have a program that's going to be implemented or offered to a group that's too small, then regardless of how beneficial it is for the participants, a randomized evaluation is just not going to be able to detect the positive effect it's having. So another is if the program is too early, it typically does, really doesn't make sense to study, to do a large-scale randomized evaluation of a program that's still in the development stage. You sort of want to typically want to study something that sort of is at a mature enough stage that you feel like it's developed and it's ready to be evaluated. The other situation that is where a randomized evaluation doesn't make sense is if it's too late. So if the program is already being delivered to everyone who is either eligible or for whom the policymakers or the developers think the program would benefit, then there's no scope for randomization. So you typically would not hold back a program that you think is beneficial from somebody just to randomize. Typically, what we would do is if there's more students, and if you're in a school, or citizens, if it's a program that's outside of the schools, for instance, if there are more people who could benefit from the program, then you have funding to offer it to, then you would randomize to pick which one. And then the last is, of course, if you already know that that the program has a positive effect, then we wouldn't want to randomize and hold it back from anybody. There are lots of different settings where randomization can work. So one is if it's a new program that hasn't been implemented widely, it can be, as it's being rolled out to different locations, it will make sense to try and evaluate the effectiveness to see whether it's worth rolling it out to other to other locations. Sometimes an existing program will add a new service, and so you might randomly select which customers or clients would get the new service. Sometimes an existing program is going to be expanded and offered to new people, and so you would randomly assign which new people would get it in year 1 versus year 2, and that could give you a comparison group by random assignment. Again, sometimes you could be adding locations, and you could, in every new location, you could randomly select who gets the program and who doesn't. Often, a randomization works really well if there's oversubscription. So there's a program, there are far more people who want to participate than there are available slots given the funding, and so randomization is used to allocate those spots in a fair way. Sometimes there's undersubscription to a program, and you can use randomization. The way this would work is, if you have a program that you think would benefit lots of people and people aren't signing up for it, you can randomly choose people to encourage to participate. So you could sort of essentially market more aggressively to some people than others and randomly select which people to do that. And sometimes there's some sort of admissions cutoff. So there's a program and you're going to, you have, again, this is a sort of a version of oversubscription. You have a bunch of people applying for a program, and you have to pick a cutoff of who gets it and who doesn't. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Evelyn, who can talk about her experience with a randomized evaluation in Chicago from the perspective of a policymaker. So, Evelyn, go ahead.
I'm on. Thanks so much, Jon. And all of our webinar participants, it's great to be with you virtually this afternoon. As Julia said a little bit earlier, I'm the former head of the City of Chicago's Department of Family and Support Services, and that is the department that's responsible for, among other things, administering after-school and summer youth programs. And I served in that capacity for a little over 4 years as part of Mayor Emanuel's first term. And during that time, I was the mayor's point person on youth violence prevention programs. And I also, in that role, co-designed with the University of Chicago Crime Lab a special violence prevention program that we've now run as a randomized control trial evaluation 3 times. And I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But it's that experience that turned me into a big champion of using rigorous evaluation, or what we're calling on this webinar, randomized evaluation, to inform public spending on social programs. As of a few months ago, I'm also the president of Heartland Alliance, which is the largest anti-poverty and human rights nonprofit in Chicago. We annually help about 400,000 marginalized and vulnerable people around the world gain access to economic opportunity, safety, healing, justice. And even now as a practitioner, I'm still a big champion of rigorous evaluation because as a manager, I want to make sure that as we're spending our precious resources, that our programs are having the best possible outcomes for our participants, and we have some sense about their efficacy. So before telling you about our RCT experience, and I'm going to refer to RCT, randomized control trial. It's also randomized evaluation. So if you just hear me say RCT, that's what I'm referring to. I just want to provide a quick 1-minute context on our violence situation in Chicago. Historically speaking, Chicago is in a relatively low period of violence. In fact, at the end of 2013, our homicide rate was at a 50-year low, and that ranked us 31st among large cities in the U.S., contrary to our media perception. But even during that low point year, we had 415 murders and 1,864 shootings. So in terms of raw numbers, we were the highest in the country, and so we kind of gained a notorious reputation for our high gun violence. A few characteristics about our violence is that it's heavily concentrated in certain high poverty communities. It disproportionately affects youth, racial and ethnic minorities, both as victims and offenders. And it's complicated by the fact that we have a disproportionately large and fractured gang population, as well as a disproportionately large number of illegal guns that are flowing into these same communities. So even though we're in a historical low period of violence, and even though we're not the most violent city in the U.S., if you happen to be unfortunate enough to live in a high crime community in Chicago, your daily experience of violence is not unlike what's experienced in some of the most violent places in the world. And it's that reality that our mayor has been attempting to change by making it a top priority of his administration, and in turn, making school data, law enforcement data, and social program data available to researchers so that his department heads, like me, could make more informed decisions about how to allocate scarce resources while also achieving big impacts for the greatest number of our residents. One moment, please. So the Crime Lab at the University of Chicago has completed, is now conducting RCTs on several different models of youth violence prevention programs in Chicago. Jon talked about the MATCH program, which is done under the umbrella of Urban Labs, all part of a partnership of research laboratories that are helping the city of Chicago do more randomized controlled trials. But this afternoon, I wanted to talk about a youth summer employment program we designed in 2012. Not just because I was directly involved in designing that program, and I also oversaw the 3 RCTs that we've conducted on the program to date, but also because I think it's a prime example of what Jaipal's state and local innovation initiative is trying to achieve. That is, it's trying to achieve more partnerships between university researchers and municipal leaders to design and rigorously test programs in response to urgent social problems. So in 2012, soon after Mayor Emanuel took office, which was mid-2011, I met with researchers at the University of Chicago Crime Lab to talk about youth violence. And my department at the time was spending about $36 million annually on youth programs, and without a whole lot of certainty that that particular level of spend annually was addressing violence and school outcomes, arguably the most important things affecting youth. And we quickly began talking about the potential opportunities to learn about which of my department's programs were impacting violence. So we decided another important thing to note is that at the time, Chicago was offering about 17,000 summer jobs to youth, and we decided that of that 17,000, we would carve out about 700 slots from that summer job program to test the violence reduction effects of a summer job. And we called that special experiment One Summer Chicago Plus. It was an 8-week program targeting youth that were still in high school and who were at a higher risk of violence involvement by virtue of where they lived and went to school. We gave them government and nonprofit minimum wage jobs in Illinois, that's $8.25, for 25 hours a week. They were also, all of the youth in the treatment group were assigned an adult job mentor at a ratio of 10 students to a single mentor. And I should mention that these were hired mentors. So not like a big brothers, big sister kind of volunteer mentors, but hired mentors whose job it was to ensure the success of the youth in the program by being available to them no matter what time of day. So that was kind of the quality of that mentorship. And we also created 2 treatment arms. For half of the youth, we replaced 2 of their daily job hours with a cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT-based curriculum, and they earned the same wages during that time as the youth who were in the job only. Well, we wanted to target youth living in high-crime communities, so we invited all the youth from 13 high schools in those communities to apply, and ultimately 1,634 youth applied. On the heat map that you see to the right, each of those green dots represents a young person who applied for the program and where they live. And it shows that we did a pretty good job of targeting the youth who were living in the city's most violent communities. A few more things about the youth who applied. Their average age was about 16 and a half. 95% of them were Black, 3% Hispanic. Our proxy for income is a free and reduced lunch, and 93% of the applicants were receiving free and reduced lunch. About 1 in 5 of applicants had been arrested in the past, and on average, applicants had missed about 6 weeks of school in the prior year. And on average, they came from neighborhoods where there was 19% unemployment. So we ran a lottery of those applicants, and we offered 364 youth the treatment that included a job only. 366 youth got the treatment that included a job plus the CBT-based curriculum. And 904 youth were assigned to a control, which meant they could apply to any other summer program, including the other summer job programs that were out there. They could participate in any other program that they wanted. They just weren't able to participate in this special experimental program that we called One Summer Chicago Plus. So over 16 months, we tracked the youth through administrative data, meaning arrest data, school, all kinds of school data, school outcome data, and employment data. And 16 months after randomization, we saw a 43% reduction in violent crime arrests among the youth who were assigned to the treatment. And those results, importantly, were not seen during the 2 months that they were in the program, but rather in the 14 months after the end of the program. There was also no real difference that we detected between the 2 treatment arms. So the group that got CBT instead of all work hours worked about as that treatment worked just as well as the treatment that included only jobs. That's significant if the CBT component is really expensive. What this would suggest is that you wouldn't need to have that component in there to get the same result, the same outcome, and so it could reduce the cost. And in our case, the cost of the CBT wasn't very costly, and the youth really, really liked it. And so we have kept in CBT aspects to our program. So this is a pretty remarkable result, and it was pretty unexpected for an 8-week summer job program. The program, by the way, cost about $3,000 per youth, a little bit less. This was kind of all the bells and whistles, $3,000 per youth. And Dr. Sarah Heller, who was the principal investigator on the study at the time, she was at the University of Chicago Crime Lab, and she's since moved on to the University of Pennsylvania. But she submitted the study for peer review and publication in the journal Science, and Science picked up and published the study in December of 2014. And there's a note at the bottom of this slide if you want to read the article and the study. It's really excellent. And what happened next was really exciting for us. First, the publication in Science garnered us a lot of positive attention from other researchers and journalists and municipal leaders in other U.S. cities and even internationally. But more importantly for us was that the mayor used that study, was motivated to seek additional funding to expand the program. And within a month of its publication in Science, he had secured $10 million from private philanthropists to expand the program to 2,000 youth this past summer, 3,000 youth next summer, and 4,000 youth in 2017. So a high-quality study that showed great results allowed us to make this program available to more than 4 times the number of youth who we were serving in 2012, and that just would never have happened without the rigorous science attesting to the value of the program. And I'll tell you, another thing in Chicago, if there are people from Chicago on the call, I'm sure you will agree that we have a lot of skeptics in the city about these kinds of things, and even the partnership between the University of Chicago and the city was viewed with a little skepticism that, of course the researchers' studies would always show positive results, and that it's not only not true, but the fact that this study landed in such a prestigious journal that is really rigorous about the kind of studies it publishes, validated that this was good science and that this was really a well-designed study, and that kind of helped us get a little bit of credibility for what we were trying to do. So I'm going to finish up by just saying that RCTs have really been cost prohibitive for so long that state and local governments, private funders, practitioners simply don't rely on them. And as a result, the field of practitioners and even government administrators who might benefit from them are out of practice about how to get them done. Often don't understand how to think in terms of how to set up the designs, how to know if a program is a good candidate for an RCT. And so what's made a really big difference in the city of Chicago in our embracing of rigorous evaluation is that the evaluation is being done at no cost to the city. And we had to invest a lot of time. We've had to take a stand for it. We've had to learn about what it means to design a program that can be studied rigorously. But the fact that the service is pro bono has really taken away the biggest excuse for not using rigorous methods to learn what works and how we should be investing our scarce dollars to get the best outcomes for our population. So I'm going to end there and hand the presentation back to Julia, but I look forward to responding to your questions a little bit later on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Evelyn. And the goal of the State and Local Innovation Initiative is to support just the kind of collaborative and feasible randomized evaluations that Evelyn just described. And so to accomplish that goal, Jaipal North America is hosting a 2-phase competition. So in the first phase of the competition, state and local governments can apply for a package of resources, which Don described a bit, and this includes ongoing technical support from a team of Jaipal staff, flexible pilot funding of up to $100,000 to help get these evaluations off the ground, and matchmaking with Jaipal's network of researchers who can help you to design and then carry out these evaluations. And then in phase 2, governments that have successfully partnered with a researcher from Jaipal's network to design a high-quality and feasible randomized evaluation can apply for funding, typically in the range of $250,000 to $500,000 to actually carry out the evaluation. And applying is easy. All we ask is for a letter of interest describing how you would use rigorous evidence to answer an important policy question. And here's a quick look at the timeline for the first phase of this competition. So on January 11th, we'll be hosting a second webinar for potential partners. That webinar will feature Melissa Carney from the University of Maryland, who's a Jaipal affiliate and one of the co-chairs for this initiative, as well as Sarah Heller from the University of Pennsylvania, who led the evaluation of the summer jobs program that Evelyn just described. And Melissa and Sarah will share some ideas for practical opportunities to conduct randomized evaluations, and also give you a sense of what it looks like to run a randomized evaluation from start to finish. February 16th is the deadline to submit letters of interest, and then we'll invite finalists to submit full proposals and select the first set of state and local governments in June. We anticipate holding multiple rounds of both Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the competition and working intensively with up to 12 state and local governments over the course of the initiative. And if you want more information or have questions or would like to sign up for updates, you can visit our website, which is here on the bottom of the screen, povertyactionlab.org/state and local. So that's the end of our presentation. We're going to move now into the Q&A. Please continue to submit questions through the chat box if you have any. To start us off, I have a question I thought Jon could answer. So someone had asked, could the control and treatment groups be determined by neighborhoods? So could the evaluation focus on a particular neighborhood?
So that's a great question. So it is possible to do it that way. The difficulty with having the intervention happen at the neighborhood level is that if the intervention happens at the neighborhood level, then you should think of the sample size essentially being the number of neighborhoods you have. And in order to have a big enough sample to, at the end of the study, be able to tell whether the intervention worked, you would need a pretty large number of neighborhoods, meaning a pretty large number of neighborhoods where you could implement the program, and then also a large number of neighborhoods where the program wouldn't be implemented but would be a randomly selected comparison group. So it would not be possible to have an intervention that only took place in one neighborhood if it happened in the entire neighborhood and not in other neighborhoods. But it might be possible to do it if there was, say, a city that had 100 neighborhoods and you randomly selected 50 to have the program happen and 50 not. If you wanted to work in one neighborhood, it would be possible to randomly select individuals to get a program or to, within that neighborhood, and so to have all both the quote-unquote treatment group and the control group all be within the same neighborhood. But selection for the program would have to be at the individual level, not at the neighborhood level.
Great, thank you, Jon. So another question that we received, and Jon, I thought you could speak to this as well, is what about entitlement programs? So is it possible to evaluate a program that's an entitlement program, or would that be cause ethical concerns?
That's a great question. Let's see. You certainly could never, governments have different rules than we as researchers do, but certainly from the researcher's side, any researcher that would partner with you would have to get the study approved by the institutional review board at their university, and I can't imagine a university approving. Well, I don't want to say that too strongly. It seems like it would be complicated to have a study where you would hold back benefits or entitlements that someone had the right to. The way that sometimes things like that can be evaluated is if there's a particular entitlement that you're interested in, sometimes you can make it more generous for a randomly selected set of people. So you can figure out whether if you expanded the program by, not necessarily by, well, you could expand the program either by making it, increasing eligibility, so making some people who wouldn't otherwise be eligible, or by increasing the generosity of the benefits of the program for people who already would be eligible. But typically you can't hold back benefits from somebody who otherwise would have had it just for the purpose of a study.
Great, thanks, Jon. And to provide just one more example of the kind of evaluation that might be feasible in the case of an entitlement program, I think Jon mentioned briefly a study that took place with H&R Block and the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And so that would be a case where students right now are eligible to complete the FAFSA and apply for student aid, and we wouldn't want to deny any student that opportunity that they already have. But in that case, the researchers randomly offered a subset of students extra personalized assistance and information about how to complete the form. And so that we can see both whether that assistance helps students to complete the FAFSA, and then also whether accessing federal aid at higher rates help them to attend and then complete college. That would be an example of how we could offer something in addition to an entitlement program to maybe evaluate its effects. So one question that came in that I will answer is whether you can apply if you have multiple programs that you might be interested in evaluating, and the answer there is yes. So I think one of the things that we're hoping to offer to states and cities that are selected, state and local governments that are selected through the program is help thinking through some of those opportunities. And as Jon talked about, there are some cases when randomized evaluations make sense, and then in other cases where for a variety of reasons they turn out not to be feasible. And so we're happy to help you think through either before the application stage if you want to send us an email, or once you apply, which of those opportunities are the best fit for this initiative. So I have a question now that I'm going to ask to Evelyn, which is, can you talk a bit more about how the findings from the summer job study or perhaps one of the other evaluations that you worked on impact or influenced policy in Chicago?
Well, I can tell you, since I was kind of setting that policy for certainly for my department, that first evaluation, as I said, we ran 3 of these RCTs on variations on this program model. So in 2012, you saw the results on that and how that was designed. And in 2013, we did a different study. We tried to apply the same exact program to a much more high-risk group of youth, so youth who were already involved in the criminal justice system, multiple arrests, coming out of detention centers, and these are the kids that we thought would be actually more likely to pick up a gun, or be victims of violence. And so we thought if this program worked for the high school youth, maybe it'll also work for this higher risk group, many of whom were out of school. And what we learned in that study, which hasn't yet been published, is that it just didn't bear out. It wasn't true that particular 8-week intervention had a significant impact on the violence risk of the higher risk group. And what was really important was that the researchers were able to give me early findings with lots of caveats about how early it was, but they were starting to see in the data that the program wasn't looking like it was having the impact that it had on the high school cohort in 2012. And so that was really important because they shared that information with me before I put out the next RFP for the 2014 summer. And I can tell you that I was totally prepared to offer the program again to that very, very high-risk group because, again, we thought this is a group that's more likely to pick up guns, and we want our program to really help stop the gun violence in our city. And so if I didn't have the information at the right time from the researchers to say, no, that's not the right group, the sweet spot really is these kids who are still in high school, who are kind of on the cusp, they're getting in trouble, but they're still there. That's who this model works for, not the high-risk group. I would have wasted another summer's worth of resources on a group that wasn't going to benefit from that particular model. And so that was really important in shaping some big resource allocation decisions.
Julie, can I add something to that? So Evelyn, that's the thing you just described is fascinating to me, and I think it highlights something really important, which is that the results of randomized evaluation can be really helpful to policymakers, regardless of whether the findings are that the program worked or that the findings are that the program didn't work.
Right.
And sometimes, actually, for a policymaker faced with a very restrictive budget, learning that things don't work is actually more helpful than learning that things do work, because you're often having to, not fund things that you'd like to fund. And so, I described the results of the match tutoring program where we found that the program did work, and that helped CPS to make the decision to use its own funding to expand the program. Another example was a program similar to what Evelyn described, a program called Becoming a Man, which is also a cognitive behavioral therapy-based program that was being implemented in the Chicago Public Schools by a social service agency called Youth Guidance. And the study of that found big reductions in violent crime arrests as through a randomized controls trial, and that also led to increased funding for the program. It helped to raise outside funds from private foundations to expand the program, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes the results of the study can lead to additional resources to fund programs that work, but sometimes, and maybe even just as helpful, the results of the study can help policymakers make decisions about what not to fund, to free up resources to fund other things that are more promising.
Great, thanks. So we've had a few questions about what the timeline for proposals should be and when should randomization occur and when should the research wrap up. And I think the short answer to that is it's very flexible and it really depends on the specifics of the program. So I think oftentimes we think about randomizing when, as John mentioned, a program is expanding to new areas or accepting new applications or opened up to a new set of folks, because that often provides an opportunity to, in a fair way, decide who will have access to the program first and who might have access to the program later. And so obviously that will depend on the nature of the program or the policy you're interested in when that opportunity occurs. And in terms of how long the research will last, again, that really depends on the question that you're answering. So for example, if you're thinking about, is it possible to encourage more people to participate in a particular program, for which the sign-up is occurring relatively soon, that's something we can observe relatively soon. But if, for example, you're interested in the impact of an education program on children's later life outcomes, often you might have to wait several or even many years to observe that outcome that you're interested in which case the research would continue for many years. So all of that is something that we would be able to discuss with state and local governments once they're selected, and it would really be case by case based on the question that was of interest. So I have another question that I thought John might be able to answer for us, which is whether it's possible to do this with retrospective analysis and looking at cases where folks have already opted in or out of a program.
So that without knowing the specifics, my initial answer would be no. And the reason is that this initiative is designed to fund and develop evaluations that are based on random assignment. And if the random assignment didn't happen at the time when the people were being chosen when participation was beginning, then it's not possible to go back and randomly assign after the fact. There might be something about the specific example where maybe there was random assignment that happened earlier, but in general, this type of study has to be designed in advance, and it has to be set up before the program actually is delivered to people.
Thanks. So one question that I'll answer is, what factors are we looking for in the state and local governments that apply? And I would highlight three. So the first is we want to make sure there's a commitment from the policymakers that are applying to use evaluation to answer an important policy question. So we hope that these evaluations will be useful for you in your decision making, and that's the first thing we want to understand. The second is that there is a feasible opportunity for randomization, and that's something that we can help you think through as part of the application process, but in some cases the idea will not be feasible. And the third is that we want to think about policies or programs where we can generate lessons that might be useful not just to the particular state or local government that's applying, but also to state and local governments in other places. So to the extent that it's a question that many state or local governments are facing or a challenge that a lot of them are trying to tackle, that would be something that we would prioritize also in selecting applicants for the program. And so one other question that I've received from a few people that I'll answer is who can apply? So for example, can school districts apply? Can community-based organizations apply together with state and local governments, or can consortia of state and local governments apply together? And so the answer to that is that at least the initial applicant has to be a state or local government, but it could be the case that the state or local government is partnering with a community-based organization or other nonprofit to implement the program, and that would be fine. And it could be that state and local governments want to apply together, for example, to look at a program that's taking place across multiple locations, or it might be that multiple departments or agencies in a single jurisdiction want to collaborate together to do an evaluation, and all of that would be fine as long as it's the state or local government that is taking the lead on the application. And then one final question, which John, maybe you could speak to, is are there certain issue areas that this initiative is focusing on?
That's a very good question. I think the answer is that the initiative is open to all sorts of issue areas. We want to support research that will be useful to state and local policy makers, and so that can, this is not an initiative where we have a bunch of researchers who have decided what types of questions they want to answer, and we're going to go pitch our research ideas to state and local policy makers and say, hey, can we use your state or your city as a laboratory to answer our academic questions. We want the studies to be on things that will help state and local policymakers to make informed decisions and that will generate evidence that other state and local policymakers can use to make informed decisions in the future. And Julie, you can speak to whether there's something more specific than that would be helpful. But I think the general idea is that there aren't really particular areas that we have in mind.
So I would just echo what John said, which is this initiative is really wide open to a range of policy areas. At Jaipal, we think about poverty very broadly, and our researchers work across sectors. So as I mentioned, that includes things like healthcare, education, finance, even energy and the environment. And so we're open to policy questions that fall under all of those sectors, and we're really interested to hear from the state and local governments that apply what kinds of research would be most useful to them. So with that, I know that we're coming up to the end of our time. I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of the questions that were submitted, but we have a record of those in the chat box, and we'll do our best both to add those to a Q&A that's already posted on the website, and then where it's a more specific question, respond to folks individually. If you have any questions, feel free to visit povertyactionlab.org/state and local, and you can find there contact information for myself and my colleagues who are working on this initiative. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you.